Okay, so this is a video that I am very excited to make because I like shakeups. I like when things change, to be honest with you. I know a lot of people don't like that conversation, but you know what? The ARs list when it comes to the best DPS, yeah, there is a big shakeup on it. And with the next phase of the PTS, phase 2, there were more changes. So we're gonna go through every single AR, what's the changes, and also I'm gonna show you guys the spreadsheet for the best DPS weapons, burst DPS on the base stats, right? Not including the talents and also not including the builds. So I'm just gonna show you guys the base DPS, and there is a big change on the meta. So first of all, one thing I gotta do like a disclaimer, or just to kind of explain, when it comes to the base damage of a weapon on a build, you gotta look for that white number. That's the base damage of the weapon, and that's what the developers, when they give the the buffs, that's what they changing, because that's what the build comes from, that white number. This orange number, this is after your build. Like for example, if you put the same Chameleon on a tank build, that orange number will change, but that white number won't change. As a fact, I'll show you that. Let's go on the loadout. This is all blue. Put that on. Put that Chameleon on. You see now that orange number is different, but the white number, it's not. It's the same, because that's the base damage of a weapon. And if you want to know how to find that, you go right here on options, and then you toggle show base damage. So on or off, on or off. So with that out of the way, starting off with a Chameleon, this weapon did not get any buffs whatsoever, any change. So the weapon's still the same, and is still one of the strongest weapon after that adaptive instinct talent kicks in. Before that talent, if you calculate with just the base damage, this weapon is bad. But once the talent activates the adaptive instinct, this weapon is one of the best in the game. Moving on, the SIG 556 and the mechanical animal, which is the named version of it, they did not get any buffs, but the mechanical animal itself, the named version, got a change to the talent, which is kind of a buff. So the future perfection now stacks up to 4 times instead of 3 times, I believe, and that makes it a good weapon for hybrid builds. But the thing is, the weapon itself, DPS, it's one of the worst. The next weapon, a lot of people are going to be mad about it. Guess what it is? The Carbine 7. This is a great weapon. I've seen people make videos about it, and well, on the DPS list, this thing is going down. Not because it got nerfed, it's just because everything else got a buff to the damage or RPM or something else that is going to bring them way over the Carbine 7. So the Carbine 7 did not get any buffs other than the talent itself. That's not going to be predetermined anymore. So on the next update, you can find the Carbine 7 with any talent dropped on it, because before that it was a preset talent that always was dropping with it. So the TU20 and the Railsplitter, they are not looking good. Now they got a buff, a weird one. They got a plus 10 rounds on the magazine, which is gonna put this weapon now at 60 rounds in the magazine if you modded with the plus 20 rounds extra extended magazine. Other than that, this weapon did not get any other buff, so the weapon actually went down on the list because of the other buffs that the other weapons got. This next one hurts a lot. This is the Police M4. They basically got no buffs at all, no changes, and because everything else got a buff, so they went down on the list a lot. This is my favorite AR in the game. I'm still gonna use it though, but mathematically it's not one of the greatest no more. And with that said, the Police M4, the Pyromaniac named version, and the St. Elmos engine did not get any buff whatsoever. All of the MK16s, they did get a buff, which is the MK16, the SOCOM MK16, the Tactical MK16, and the Tactical Replica. They all got a 10% weapon damage increase. The next weapon in the list, and this one was a weird buff, but the Honey Badger and the Savage Wolverine, which is the named version, they did get a buff, which is a plus 5 rounds on the magazine. So now, after you modded with that plus 20 rounds on the magazine, it's gonna put it at 55 rounds on the magazine. The TKB is an assault rifle that there is no other reason to use it other than use just the named version, the Kingbreaker. The TKB did not get any buffs whatsoever, and the Kingbreaker also did not get any buffs, but the Kingbreaker, because of that special talent that it has, is still going to be high up there when it comes to DPS because of that 20% amplified damage to pulse enemies. The AUG variant assault rifle, they all got a buff, and if you don't know, the AUG is the weapon that makes the Bighorn and also the invisible hand, which is the named version. Now they all got a buff to the weapon damage, which is a 10% weapon damage increase. That's gonna put the Bighorn up there and the invisible hand way up there when it comes to the DPS, but the AUG itself as the weapon, the regular one, it's still not that great. Now with that said, the Bighorn, not only the damage increase that it got, the weapon talent also got a change. So basically, the weapon talent still does the same amount of damage, but it procs a lot faster, which making this weapon one of the best assault rifles for the next update if you can control it. The only downside of this weapon is still the magazine size, only 40 rounds on a magazine. That's a turn off point for a lot of players, but if you can manage that, this weapon now is going to be actually good for the next update. The P416, all of the versions and also the named version, the Glory Daze, they all got a buff to the RPM. That includes the exotic version, the Eagle Bearer, which gonna bring them up in the competition for best weapons, the Eagle Bearer specifically. Because the Eagle Bearer, even though it is a P416, it does have a higher base damage compared to the regular variants, which is the P416. The RPM are the same, and the magazine on this weapon also is higher. So overall, the Eagle Bearer, from that RPM increase, it's gonna put it one of the best assault rifles in the game for the next update. The two ACRs in the game, they did get a damage buff, which is a 10% weapon damage. So it used to be a really bad weapon, now they are kind of decent. And also the FAL assault rifles, they all got a buff to the damage, all of the variants, and that is only 5% weapon damage increase. Now I spoke this before, I would prefer the FAL getting a mag size increase over having a damage increase. It's only a 40 rounds in a magazine after you mod it with a plus 20 rounds. So it is a nice weapon, but that magazine size, it's gonna turn off a lot of players. The G36, all of them got a nice buff to the RPM, which brings them from 750 RPM to 800 RPM. That is a buff increase to the DPS, so the G36 will be looking nice on the next update. The AK assault rifles, they all got a damage buff to them, which is only 8% damage increase, but keep in mind, one of them has a higher base damage between the AK variants. So the AKM itself, which is the shorter name, right, has 67.2k base damage per bullet. They all got a 8% damage increase, so the AKM actually went high on one of the best DPS weapons for next update. But the thing is, this weapon does not have a mod slot for the muzzle, so that's where this weapon will fall short, because you might miss a 5% crit chance in there. So the famous FAMAS, the best DPS weapon for a long time, well, it's losing its throne for the first time for a long time, because it did not get any change to the RPM, to the damage, to the mag size. It didn't get any change, so the weapon still is the same. And that's not a bad thing, the weapon still is good. It's just mathematically it's not anymore the best DPS assault rifles. Now these next weapons, they got me by surprise. On the PTS phase 1 they did not get any change. On the PTS 2 though, they got a buff, a 10% damage increase for the PDR, the test subject, and the capacitor. And with that buff, actually they are gonna be one of the best DPS weapons for some reason on the next update. So the people that like the capacitor for the skill builds, well, this weapon now is gonna be even better for also just DPS builds. It's not gonna be the best, but it's a lot better than what it was on the title update 19. So yeah, it got me by surprise, and yeah, it's it's time to use a PDR in the test subject. And last but not least, the new king for next update. You better get you one, because this is gonna be the new best DPS weapon in the next update. It's gonna be competing with the FAMAS. FAMAS still gonna be great weapon, but is the F2000. It's just gonna have a slight better DPS over the FAMAS. And the F2000 has a name version, which is the Shield Splinterer, and it has a perfect talent, which is the Perfect Optimist. Now this talent will give you a total of 16% damage once you empty your whole magazine. That's the amount of damage overall that it will give you. And then the regular Optimist just gives you 13% overall damage to your magazine after you empty your mag. So 16% overall damage with the perfect version. It's not bad at all. Okay, so those were all of the assault rifles in the game, and those were the changes that they did or did not get on the PTS Phase 2 for Project Resolve. Now let's talk about this list. So this is the list of all of the ARs in the game, and I have the burst damage in here, the sustained damage. I have them categorized by variants. All of the informations are in here. So starting off with the variants, these are all of the variants weapons that we have in the game. So they are all organized, right? And you can see the ACR, the AK, the AUG, and you get the idea going down, right? Now an interesting thing I do want to show you guys in here, some of these weapons inside of the same category, they do have a slight difference. For example, start with the AK-47. So the AKM, as you guys can see, it does have a slight higher base damage, but as I told you guys, also it has one less mod slot. Another example is the Eagle Bearer. Now as you guys can see, the Eagle Bearer is a P416, but between them, the Eagle Bearer has a higher base damage, a higher mag size, which is gonna give the Eagle Bearer compared to the other P416s a higher burst DPS and a higher sustained DPS. Last example, I want to mention the Bighorn. Now, if you guys didn't know, the Bighorn is actually an AUG variant. And between these AUG variants, actually there is an interesting thing here. Taking a look at the burst DPS, they all have different burst DPS, but they have the same base damage. That's because the RPM on them, it's different. So it goes from 800, 752 when it's rounded, and 680. Now those are the major difference I see in between the variants, but yeah, you guys can take a look at that. Now let's move on for the burst DPS list. So this list is the list organized by burst DPS from top to bottom. So highest on the top, bottom is the lowest. And as you guys can see, there is some surprises in here, some stuff that I was not expecting. Starting off with the AKM, it did get a big jump from that 8% damage to base damage that it got, but remember, it does not have 4 mod slots, it's only 3 mod slots on it, but still, it's a good buff to the burst DPS of this weapon. And so now the AKM basically is a better version of the TKB, which is a weapon that makes the Kingbreaker. Also the PDR, the test subject, and the capacitor, this was my biggest surprise. I did not see that coming. That buff that they got bring them all the way up here. Now the PDR used to be like a bad weapon. Now they still have only 3 mod slots on them, so I don't know if people are gonna use them, but for just the base DPS of it, it is interesting to see them on top now. The test subject that has the perfect version of the InSync. Capacitor has that talent that gives it more damage for skill tier that you have on the build. Either way, you know, it's nice to see all of them in here. It's gonna be interesting to see the shake up on it, even on top of the FAMAS, right? But the FAMAS still have like 4 mod slots, and but you know, we'll have to test them out and see. On paper, on this base calculation, the PDR is beating the FAMAS. I did not see that coming. It is a slight difference though, it's not much. You can see right here, 663,000 for the PDR and 662,000 for the FAMAS on the burst DPS. Now for the exotics, the best ones in here are the Bighorn and also the Eagle Bearer, and I tested them both on the legendary in the PTS, and I can say the Bighorn does have that damage. So here's my opinion about Bighorn. I feel like it's a good weapon, has that damage. On heroic content, it will be great, it will be perfect. But on legendary, one thing that's gonna hold it back is that magazine size. It's only 40 bullets. So I was killing the NPCs on legendaries, but I feel like I was reloading my weapon way too often on the legendary, right? And that 60 rounds of Eagle Bearer and 70 rounds of St. Elmo's engine feels better on a legendary compared to Bighorn. But the Bighorn has that damage. It does have that damage. So yeah, that buff is definitely in there. You can feel it if you use it. Last but not least, obviously we have to mention the St. Elmo's engine. It's all the way down here, you guys can see. That's my favorite weapon. The M4 variants are my favorite weapons in the game. And yeah, they're down there. But keep in mind, the St. Elmo's engine is still gonna be good on one thing, which is this other list right here, organized by Sustain DPS. So on the Sustain DPS are these blue numbers right here, you can see. And the St. Elmo's engine jumps up over there again, you guys can see, and it's because of that 70 rounds in a magazine, that 2 seconds reload time. All of that helps for a better Sustain DPS. And keep in mind, the St. Elmo's engine has some ridiculous mod that gives it a lot of damage, crit chance, crit damage, and weapon handling. All of that makes it so good. So St. Elmo's engine on paper is not looking that great, but believe me, it's not going nowhere, people. It's not going to, it's not going to be the best no more, but it's going to be right there on top, competing with every other AR. And that's it, guys. That's all of the list for the AR changes that's coming for the Year 5 Season 3, which is a Project Resolve. And these are changes that came on PTS Phase 2. Let me know which AR is your favorite. Mine is the Police M4, as I mentioned, and the St. Elmo's engine, because they are the same weapon, and I'm gonna still using them. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed the video, a like on it would be super appreciated. Subscribe for more, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.